Welcome to Shoot Like a Girl, a podcast featuring interviews with extraordinary military women from around the world who push their limits on and off duty. I'm your host, Kate Stewart, and this is episode number 38. Today's guest is retired First Sergeant Tiffany Myrick-Woodley. Tiffany served 20 years in the U.S. Army's Military Police Corps. She completed 2 combat tours to Afghanistan and 2 tours to Korea. She played an essential role in the gender integration of the Army's combat arms occupations, where she served as a member of the Cultural Support Team, enabling 75th Ranger Regiment and Naval Special Warfare Development Group special mission units by engaging the female and adolescent populations in Afghanistan. Additionally, she was selected to observe and advise on the implementation of standards during the integration of Ranger School, the Army's premier leadership course. Tiffany holds an MBA with a concentration in international business and is married with a blended family of 4 children.
Steady, steady, nice and steady. Light, hill, cover. I'm a steamroller, baby. I'm a steamroller, baby. Just a rolling down the line. Just a rolling down the line. I'm a steamroller, baby. I'm a steamroller, baby. Just a rolling down the line. Just a rolling down the line. So you better get out of my way now. So you better get out of my way now. Before I roll all over you. Before I roll all over you.
Tiffany, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I'm very excited for this. As I was kind of telling you in the email, I was really fascinated ever since I read Ashley's War about the American CSTs, and I just think that there should be more awareness about it. So I'm super excited to interview you today.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for having me.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, in a neighborhood called Berkeley, not to be confused with Berkeley, California. But it's an urban neighborhood consisting of mostly Black residents. So it was a small area, and it definitely shaped me for who I am today. So I'm proud of where I came from.
Did you have any military members in your family, or did you know any military members when you were growing up?
So I did. My dad served in Vietnam, or not Vietnam, sorry, after Vietnam War. So he served late 70s for about 4 years. And my maternal grandfather, he was a Marine in World War II, but he died when I was young. And my dad served before I was born. So I really didn't have that influence over me that shaped why I joined. But I did have family members that joined and served.
And what type of activities were you interested in when you were growing up? Like, were you athletic? Were you more into school? Or what was young Tiffany like?
Young Tiffany was a little bit of both. So I was 100% tomboy. My brother and I are a year apart, so his friends were my friends. We climbed trees, we wrestled, doing WWE moves on each other, boxing. I mean, all the kind of things that you would do, with a boy. My brother and I did that together. But also in school, academically, I was, from elementary school, I was assessed and put into a gifted and talented program. So I had a lot of extracurricular activities, going to different schools once a week. I actually had programs at William and Mary, some science programs, things like that. So I ran track, basketball. My basketball coach had me playing volleyball, which wasn't really my thing. So I did a lot of different, things from academics, band, sports. It was a lot. So a lot of stuff to keep me busy as a child.
And when you were young, did you have a specific job in mind that you wanted to do when you got older?
I wanted to I loved science, so I wanted to be an astronaut. Then I said I wanted to be an archaeologist. So those were the career fields that I was looking into as a child. But as I got older, I think the real world life and, like the influences from real world, I think it started to change a little bit. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I kind of stuck around the science side and I went to college to study biology. I figured I wanted to be in the medical field somewhere. So along those lines, just not exactly, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do.
I think that I also went through a bit of an archaeology phase as well when I was younger. And then yeah, same thing. Like I kind of changed my mind all over the place, trying to have all of these grand ideas. But it's so hard when you're young, to make those decisions, like going to university, like, oh, what am I going to do? And a lot of times people don't have exposure to what those jobs actually are, and they have no idea if they'll like them or not. And then they kind of make their whole life decision based on that.
Yeah, definitely. That was me all day. You see those things in school, you watching, learning about dinosaurs and finding mummies in Egypt and all that stuff seems cool. And they learn about solar systems, so you want to be involved with that, but you don't know what it entails to be able to do those things and the exposure outside of a book or watching some videos in school. How can you get that exposure to be able to go do those paths and go along in those career fields that interest you at a young age?
And so, what was your path to join the Army?
So I had my daughter in high school, and I went to college for biology. And while I was there, I didn't wasn't doing very well, and it wasn't because of the rigors of college. It was mainly trying to be a college student, a parent, and work while doing your studies. So that was very tough for me. So I saw this young lady. And we had like this student union area where you could study and kind of gather and do different things. So she was there reading her books, and she had on the BDUs, like the battle dress uniform, and her boots were shiny, her hair was all neat, and I asked her, like, she looked put together. So I asked her what she did. She told me she was in ROTC and to talk to her ROTC professor to give me more information about it. But what I did, I ended up talking to a recruiter. So I went to the recruiting station and I said I wanted to be a Marine. I thought the Marines were tough. It was for a short stint of time. I just wanted the biggest challenge that I could get. So I was going to the Marine Corps office when a Army recruiter came out and convinced me to talk to him before I talked to the Marine recruiter. And he basically sold me on picking the job that I wanted and the term of service that I wanted. So I originally chose to be a medic, the biology thing, and I had a short term. However, a few weeks later, he called me up. I was supposed to go to MEPS. I had my AIT, my basic training, all those dates scheduled. And he said that they had too many people going to the medical field, and then I had to push my date 5 months to the right. And at that time, I already told people I was leaving. I already quit my job. I withdrew from school, so I was ready to go. And so he gave me a list of other MOSs that I qualified for, and military police was the one that I thought would best fit me. I never thought about being in law enforcement, but I had nothing against it. And also, you could get a secret security clearance and it looked good on a resume.
And so, what did the training look like to become a qualified military police officer?
So basic training is like basic training in the Army across the board, which wasn't too difficult to me. But outside of that, I think the AIT training that was most difficult was being confident under pressure. As a military police, you are going to emotionally charged situations like domestics, traffic stops. All those things can be challenging, and you have to remain assertive and under control when someone is either senior to you or the situation is just overall intimidating. But you need to overcome all of that. So that was one thing that was challenging to me. The other thing was my recruiter didn't tell me about the wartime mission of military police. Like you think it's just patrolling on a military base doing law enforcement, but they also do detaining operations, security and mobility support, where we maneuver in Humvees. We carry a lot of firepower, such as light to heavy machine guns and grenade launchers. And even at my first duty station as a private in South Korea, I was assigned as a Mark 19 gunner, which is an automatic 40 mic grenade launcher. So since females could be gunners as an MP, that was the closest women could get to combat at the time.
So did that interest you? Like if he would have told you about that beforehand, would you still have gone that route?
Absolutely. If my recruiter gave me more information about what was out there, I probably would have done a lot more. I didn't find out about airborne contracts until I was in basic training and people had Airborne school part of their contract. Um, I think he really didn't give me a lot of information because of, I was supposed to be one MOS and end up going to another. So in order to not lose me, he wanted to get me in quick. So I think I didn't get a lot of additional information about what was out there.
And then going through at the beginning, like going to basic training and going to your military police course and things like that earlier in your career, like what sort of challenges did you face as a young mother during that time?
My biggest challenge was childcare. As military police, we were either working one of three shifts during law enforcement. We were either in the field training for our wartime mission or platoon duty, which is your typical 6:30 to 5 p.m. duty day. So I re-enlisted to be closer to home, and my support network there was great. So I also had close friends who I worked with, who helped me watch my daughter when I had shift. I also paid for childcare, which was available during a normal duty day. And to make that even easier for me, I enrolled my daughter in a school that was in the district of my childcare provider, so she could put her on the bus and get her off the bus as needed when I had shift or was training. So as a young parent, you have to surround yourself with good people, good support system. You can't be successful if you do it alone.
And then, so you said one of your first duty stations was Korea. What was that like?
Oh, South Korea was very different. I grew up, I told you I grew up in Norfolk. I really didn't leave my hometown much at all. So joining the army and then thinking that I'm going to stay in the United States. And my first duty station is, oh yeah, by the way, you're going to South Korea. That was a tough pill to swallow. But the country was beautiful. I loved the culture, and it was great for me. I learned my job better than I think I could have probably stateside because of all the different things that you deal with over there. Most people are there for 1 or 2 years, so we had a lot of law and order to incidents to deal with from soldiers being soldiers. So I was in a lot of those situations where I had to be and learn to be confident while dealing with soldiers fighting or being drunk or whatever the situation. And we would go to the field a lot. So my field problems were about 30 days. Basic training, the most I've been in the field was about 3 days. So being out there, learning your field craft, getting proficient on your weapon systems, that shaped me early as a young gunner. I ended up, being a driver, and just it made me a better leader overall.
And early on, or I guess throughout your whole career, like, did you face any barriers because you were a woman, or do you find that since you were able to do your job, you were sort of viewed as an equal?
I think the barriers that I faced were initially people see you and then they see what you do. So the first thing that they see if you're a woman is your gender, and you will, whatever ideas or biases they have for women, you're going to get that until you show otherwise. And then some people, they try not to show it. But I believe that I was questioned a lot if I wanted to do something that was considered tough or, compete. I love ranges, so I love shooting, and I wanted to be out there all the time. People kind of like, why are you out here? Why do you want to be out here? And I just enjoyed it. It was fun to me. I wanted to get better. It was challenging. So competitions, disassembling, reassembling your weapon system, that was something that was fun to me. So once you start doing that, people seeing that you're proficient in your skills, then they don't question. You kind of get a reputation of being that way. But I think every time you go to new locations, you have to reestablish yourself. So it's always consistently as you meet new people, is you have to reaffirm your abilities.
Yeah, I feel like, with men, it's like it's assumed that they can do the job until they show in some way that they can't, or until they prove that they're not able to do it. Whereas women, it's assumed that they can't do it. And then it's like the burden is on us to prove that we can.
Absolutely. Yep. That's exactly how it was. Always having to prove yourself.
And then, so I'm not too sure how things work in the States with, re-enlistment. So for you, you had to release from the military and then join again or something to get back to the States. How did that work?
So I had an initial contract. I came in on a 2-year contract, and basically I had to either stay in Korea and leave the army from Korea or re-enlist, get a new contract, and go to another duty station. So what I did was I re-enlisted to go to a duty station, which was in Virginia, about 30 minutes from my mom's house. So that's basically what I did to get back to the States. I wanted to get out, but I was told that the military offers more. Korea is not the quote unquote real army. So, go see more before you decide to get out completely. So that's what I did. And I re-enlisted.
And then I did see a picture of you in your uniform, and you did have some jump wings and different badges. So you did end up going to Airborne school, did you?
I did. I did. I didn't go to Airborne school until later in my career. So it wasn't until during the time that I was an observer advisor for Ranger School was where I went to Airborne school while I was there. So they had a break where they didn't have any students, and during that time, that's when I went to Airborne school during that time.
And so before you became a CST, did you do any deployments overseas, like to Afghanistan or Iraq, as a member of the military police?
Yes, I did. So my first deployment so I returned from South Korea, and it was in 2004. And the unit that I was assigned to, I had no idea they were on orders to Afghanistan. But when I got there, they were on orders to Afghanistan, deploying later that year for 12 months. So as soon as I get back from Korea, I start my pre-deployment training at my new unit, and we deploy that year. So I was originally in Kandahar, where I did mostly detainee operations, and I performed some patrols outside of the base perimeter. But it was mostly detainee operations. And then I also later in that deployment, we went to Bagram, where we did detainee operations there and also some base defense there as well. But the thing was, during that time, I was selected as one of 3 women to support a infantry Marine Corps unit there. So they wanted female MPs to help search women and children because they didn't have women with them. So I did some training with the Marine Corps, and they took us out on mission. And it was different being with the Marines. They do things different than the Army, but it was cool because it was like I wanted to be a Marine the first time. So having that experience and exposure with them was great for me. So we went out on mission, but it was during monsoon season. We convoyed for a few days. We ended up getting rained in. A lot of the roads were impassable for their vehicles. So the mission ended up getting terminated, and I didn't have that experience to search women and children with them until as a CST. But it was still the training, the exposure, knowing what was out there. That was my first taste of seeing what it was like being a CST.
And then, so when you're doing the detainee operations, are you doing any interrogations or anything like that? Or is that sort of like a separate MOS that would do that?
Yes, that's a separate MOS. I would only watch them, make sure that they aren't hurting themselves or each other. We make sure they get to medical appointments. One of the things that I did is I'm at a hospital, and some detainees were badly injured, depending on how they were captured. So one, for example, had a colostomy bag, and I had to guard them the whole time they were at the hospital until I got relieved. And I remember having to burp the colostomy, not me, but the nurse. And I just realized that I do not want to do medical. So that was my experience being around a lot of medical and hospitals and things like that, dealing with detainees. But I also guarded them in the actual internment facility where we made sure that they ate, took them where they needed to go to get interrogated. So that's basically what we had to do.
And then after you get back to the US, how do you hear about the CST program?
So I was a platoon sergeant in Georgia, Fort Stewart, and a soldier from another platoon. He was in BLC, which is our basic leader course, and he saw the flyer there. He brought it back and said, hey, I think this is something that you should do. If anybody could do it, it's you. So he said, gave me the flyer. I read it, called the number that was on there, put the packet together and submitted it.
And so what type of workouts and things were you doing to prepare yourself physically for the CST assessment and selection?
Honestly, none. Uh, I had a 300. So we have a scale where you can max your PT with 300. And of course, they go an extended scale, but they really didn't use the extended scale other than mainly competitions or things like that to break a tie. So I had a 300 plus PT score. The requirements that was necessary for a CST, I met all of them already. So my only thought was that I just needed to maintain. I didn't know what the training consisted of. I had no idea. So I figured I was good to go.
And so for those listening that don't know what a CST is, I figure we should probably just explain that. Can you give a little explanation of what the CSTs do?
Okay, so a CST, we engaged the Afghan women and children on an objective to gain access to that part of the population that was previously inaccessible. So I searched women and children, tactically questioned them through my interpreter, support information operations, and I relayed any findings to the team. And I supported both 75th Ranger Regiment and DEVGRU. So overall, that is the basic job of a CST. And you either was a direct action CST or a village stability operation CST.
And so how long was the assessment and selection phase? And then what sort of things did they have you doing on that?
The original assessment, the physical portion of it, the assessment selection, I think it was about 10 days. And that part was a lot of running, rucking. We had team building tasks, we had obstacle courses, we had written tests. It was mostly physical and a lack of sleep. We were tested in various scenarios dealing with, they had actors and we were dealing with cultural situations. And we were tested to see how we felt under pressure or how we performed under pressure. And I think as an MP, that gave me a leg up because I've already did that. I did that since I joined, as a private. So I knew what it was like for someone to be yelling at you and for you to remain calm and assert yourself and get your point across and what you're trying to do. So there was a lot of training that we did as a CST. We had classes on the culture, language courses. Yeah, it was a lot of cultural training outside of the physical training to prepare us for being a CST.
And what was it like initially when you got there and it was just this group of, a large group of just women that are all, they sound, like they're all fit and they're all pretty badass. Because when I was reading Ashley's War, I'm like, it's crazy to me to think about that because so many times during my career, it's like maybe there's one or two other women on the course, but for the most part, it's all men. And then just to be in an environment where it would be like that many women that want to go out and do that, it was pretty neat to read about.
Oh, I thought the same thing. That was one of the reasons I didn't prepare because I figured, where I was there, I didn't have a lot of peers who were at the level I was physically. So I had the same assumptions until I went to CSC selection and it made me wish that I did more. Now I was good, don't get me wrong, but I could have been better, but I had no way of judging that because of, you don't have those peers around you with the same physical abilities. So being a CST or being around CSTs was a complete eye opener. I mean, I was surrounded with the best of the best. I mean, these were collegiate athletes. They ran track, some were on West Point's cross country team. They did, rugby. They were pretty tough, women. And I just didn't see a lot of them. It was, my thought was, where are you? Where were you? Like, where are you stationed? How come I don't know who you are? But it was eye opening and I enjoyed it. It was good to see other women doing the same thing you're doing. So you felt like you were not alone.
Did you feel, because I know in certain situations with women, that many women, it can almost be, I don't want to say catty because that's kind of stereotypical, but sometimes with that many women, it can be like that. Do you find that there was that side of things or were they more like supportive of each other and trying to help each other and lift each other up?
I mean, with any group of people, you're going to have personalities that don't match. There were a few that I personally didn't get along with, just like I would think any other environment. No one were really was catty, and I think we all were supportive. It was just, some people got along better than others. It was also where you were sitting in the classroom. Sometimes people kind of, clicked together based on MOS or branch. You saw that some people knew each other from the same installation, or they went through selection together. So, for example, the team that I went through selection with, 8 members of the 10 were selected as CSTs. They were the people that I was around the most until I became friends with other women in the course. So I don't think it was catty or anything. It's just the natural way that people gravitate to those who are similar to them.
And then how soon after you complete training do you go out on deployment?
So we completed training July, and we deployed about 3 weeks later. Took about 2 weeks of leave, came back and deployed immediately after that.
And what does it look like? So I guess how are you received by the men in the various units that you were working with? Because you were the second sort of course of CSTs to go through?
Yes. So CST2 was the first volunteer course. CST1, I believe they came from a smaller group within SOF, voluntold women. So this CST2 was the actual first time that they advertised the program to get people to volunteer to be a part of it. So my initial integration was great. So I supported 75th Ranger Regiment and DEVGRU. So being there, I mean, I got there, they ensured that I had all the equipment that I needed. We went to ranges. They made sure that, our weapons, everything, our ammo, everything that we needed was available to us. So I was assigned a MP7 from the Navy. And so I went out to the ranges to ensure that I qualify and know how to use the MP7. And with the Rangers, I used my M4. I also had, 9mm. So we would do speed shooting. We did a lot of training with them. So it wasn't a bad integration. I think it was very welcoming. It was better than I thought it would be.
And then, I mean, I think on the last podcast, the Veterans Project, you were telling the story of kind of having to come back from being out with one group and changing uniforms and then going out with the other group.
So it wasn't immediately. So we would go out on mission, and depending on who you went with, you wore their uniform. So the Navy, for example, their camouflage is different than the Army. So when I went out with the Navy, I wore the Navy kit that they set up for me, which was in their camouflage, not the same camouflage that we used. So I would wear that. But when I would go out with the Rangers, I would wear my kit that was the same as theirs. It was just a matter of their procedures and how they did things. The Rangers was concerned about tactical crossload. So if something happened to me, they knew exactly where things were. And then we could use each other's equipment. So, I had the same weapon systems. I had the same gear. They knew exactly where things were. I think the SEAL team were less concerned about that. It was more about, are you protected? Do you have the gear to protect you? Can you move? Can you do your job? Can you fight? Can you shoot? Can you do those things? And, the Rangers, they were concerned with the same thing. It was just the uniform differences. So I would go out with SEALs one day. And then if I'm going out with the Rangers, I make sure everything is set up to go out with them the next day, and vice versa.
Did you have a preference as to which group you enjoyed working with more?
I did. I enjoyed working with the SEAL team the most because I felt I had a little more autonomy with them. They move in smaller groups, so I felt as if I was used more. So, for example, if we got on target and there was an area that was unsecured, I was asked to pull security on that unsecured area. There was a time where, we had to move from one point to another because they got information that their target was at another location. So I'm carrying ladders and going with them to another location. There are times where we had a lot of KIAs on a mission, and I used my MP skills to help with biometrics and conducting, it's called SSE, sensitive site exploitation, where I would get information or bag items that I thought was important or that could give some sort of intel. So I would help with SSE. So I think at that, working with them, I just felt as if I was used a little bit more than the Rangers. They moved in larger groups and I was way in the back on all the time. So yeah, I was kind of waiting till it was secure for me to go forward. And when I did, sometimes it was some things to do. Sometimes you would have to tactically question and get out because we hadn't moved. So it just, I felt more utilized with the SEALs.
And so obviously these are some pretty high risk operations. Did you ever feel really nervous going into them? And if you did, how did you manage that?
I didn't feel nervous until Ashley died. Before that, I didn't feel nervous at all. And even after she passed, it wasn't that I was afraid to go out. It was just life and death became more real. And I mean, you have to go. I wasn't not gonna go. I make sure I talked to my daughter before mission, make sure, everything was good with my personal affairs, check with my mom, do those things just to make sure if anything happened, I was good. So those are the things that I did to combat that. But I mean, you just go.
With the CSTs, there were two types of operations. So they could do like direct action or the village stability ops. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And they gave you the choice. Like, did you get to choose which one you wanted to do?
Yes, we did. So during our training, we had the opportunity to choose which mission, we felt sought us the most. And we received two briefs, one from the SF, one from the Rangers. And then after that, after the briefs, you could write down which one that you thought was best suited for you. After you did that, the cadre either approve it or, if they thought different, they would, disapprove it and put you where they thought you would fit. But I believe everyone got the mission that they wanted. So I wanted direct action and that's what I got.
And did you got to do some cool sort of other things like fast roping and things like that to integrate with the teams that you were going out with?
Yeah. So, I talked about some of the training that we did. They made sure that we were taken care of. So my partner and I, we both were interested in mission planning. So in order for us to do our job better, we wanted to know what the mission planning consists of. What were some of the things that they took in consideration? What do they think, what in their eyes, what does our job look like to them? Any additional tasks that they think we should be able to do? Any information, specific information that they're looking for us to be able to pull out when we're doing our tactical questioning. So again, I talked about the shooting, the fast roping. So there's always a possibility where the aircraft can't land. So most of our insertions were helo insertions. So if it can't land, you have to fast rope, because it was unsafe for the aircraft to land. And in order for us to ensure that we could do that without getting injured or injuring someone else, we did a lot of fast rope training. So they had a ladder, they had the rope on the compound, and we actually went out and one of the Chinook pilots took us out up and, for us to fast rope a few times. So we were more than prepared. And then, of course, the time came we actually got to fast rope on target. So I can say that I fast roped into combat.
That is very awesome. Again, part of the reason why I wanted to start this podcast is because I feel like a lot of people don't know about this stuff. So hopefully, with the Veterans Project and doing this sort of things, we get these stories out more. And it's interesting with the US too, because, you were in combat, but women were not allowed to be in combat roles in the States. But in Canada, it was 1989 when all trades were opened up to women. So in Afghanistan, we did have women that were, infantry soldiers, infantry officers, artillery, all those types of jobs.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. I mean, we had artillery officers, we had engineer officers, but I believe even though they were artillery or engineers, they were in a certain capacity. They were part of those combat arms, but they were used in a specific capacity, not in direct combat. So I don't know if it was like that in Canada.
Yeah, no, Canada, it's just, there were no restrictions. It's even with our special operations now, there's been, I think one woman go through for the Canadian Special Operations Regiment. For JTF2, which would kind of be more like a DEVGRU type thing, there have been, I think, a couple of women that passed selection but didn't get picked up. But it's not restricted. So if they can do it, then they're allowed to do it.
Nice. Well, kudos to Canada. That's great.
Obviously there's still barriers that women face. Not all men are receptive to all of that stuff, but I think it is kind of leading the way for other nations to see that this can be done. So after your deployment, you go back to the States. Are you is there a cultural support team, like a CST unit, or do you go back to being a military police, like stationed at wherever you were before?
Yeah. So after deployment, we had the opportunity we could switch to CA or PSYOPs. A lot of CSTs did. And there was no CST specific unit. And the thought was, or at least told to us, was there was no CST unit is because they knew that they were looking at combat arms opening up to women. So they figured that they would do some more rotations of CSTs, and then, by that time, combat arms may be open to women, and all these women are going to flock to these combat arms, and there's not going to be a need for CST. So we could go back to our units, go in for another CST rotation, or switch over to CA or PSYOPs. And because we have this identifier on our records brief that shows that we went through this program, and we didn't have to go through the assessment and selection for PSYOPs or CA, as long as, for the CSTs that had that identifier. And I was on the fence about it. I loved being a CST. If I could do that job, that's all I would have done. Go back, go spend some time with your family, and then come back for another deployment, because I felt like I was doing something bigger on a grander scale. And I think that opportunity was lost by not keeping the number of women who were trained and been in those environments and who were successful. So I went back to my unit as an MP and continued my progression as in the MP Corps.
And what skills, like you were saying, that you really got to see a lot of the operational planning side. What other skills or things that you learned during that deployment did you take back to being an MP?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've learned was know yourself, like learning yourself, knowing how you are under pressure, knowing how to integrate with teams where you're a minority or different from the majority of your team. And you find things that are similarities, things that you have in common. I think it made me more aware of how to build teams and pull people together despite differences in, race, gender, those type of things. It also made me, more confident in doing my job, not only as an MP, but as a leader in general, because you have to be able to handle yourself, in those environments. And with A-type personalities, you have to be able to assert yourself without being, demeaning and things like that. So I think those type of skills are those soft skills that make any leader better. And not only that, like nothing seemed hard anymore. And people were complaining about altitude, about hills, about the physical aspects of things, or even things that I used to complain about. Things just wasn't as hard anymore. It just, it's like, oh, I've been colder, or it's been worse. So you were able to push past the levels that you initially had because you were tested.
So after this, I read that you were selected to advise on the first women going through Ranger School. So what was your role there, and what did that look like?
So Ranger School conducted an assessment and selection for women to be observers and advisors to offer feedback on the integration of the course. So during my tenure, I analyzed course requirements, advised on women-specific issues, and briefed members of Congress, the media, senior military leaders, and other cadre on their progress. From there, I also ensured that all standards were maintained and informed course leaders of any discrepancies that I perceived.
So for those women going through, is the standard the same across the board for men and women at Ranger School?
Absolutely. There was no change in the standard at all. Not at all. So the observers before we got there in January. So from January to April to the initial class, you were exposed to all male classes so you can have a baseline. And then when the women came through, you had that baseline. So if anything was different, then you were able to speak up on any discrepancies. I was personally assigned to RTAC, which is the Ranger Training and Assessment Center. I believe that's the acronym, the C. So I was assigned there, and I was able, all the women who went through at the time had to attend RTAC first. So I saw every single woman who attempted Ranger School at that time. And there was no change. If anything, I think not at RTAC, so to speak, but overall, that it was harder because it was so much scrutiny on the females. You had so many eyes on them. Everybody wanted to, did they do this specifically this way? And for the male groups, that scrutiny wasn't there.
I interviewed Major Sydney Jacks. I said that to her. I was like, from what I've read, and I have zero experience because I'm Canadian and I have had nothing to do with Ranger School, but just from everything I've read, it does seem like that. It seemed like the women were almost held to a higher standard, whereas there would be some men who would be kind of maybe on the fence and then they would get sort of passed through. But for the women, it was just even harder for them, like because you were saying they're scrutinized even more for every single thing that they're doing.
Yes, absolutely. They had these guides that each RI had, and they, would mark them off as they went along, and they would have certain tasks that were an automatic fail. If you did not do this specific task, you failed automatically. And sometimes, like, I would look at it and say, this task was completed exactly the way that male did it and the previous male did it and the previous male, those type of things. But sometimes because of so many eyes were on them, if something wasn't exact, then, oh, it's a fail. But it's like that this one guy just did the same thing, so it was just so much scrutiny on things that I wouldn't say they all were the standards, but I believe that the scrutinizing of the women just made it that much harder for them to get through. I mean, they had people that were on staff positions come out and lane walk. And you didn't see all of these guest lane walkers when it was all male course. Everybody wanted to see what the women were doing. Yeah, it was a lot of pressure and a lot of extra scrutiny on them. So definitely harder in that aspect alone.
What challenges do you think that, what other challenges other than what we've just mentioned, did you think that the first women going through Ranger School faced? And do you think it's gotten a little bit better over time for them, or is there still a long way to go?
So I spoke to a few women who were dropped from the course, and they said the same things like you and I said. You don't have a lot of women around you to kind of go off of, or to train with and have that level of peers to compare yourself to. So most of the women, they had the 300 plus PT scores. They maxed it. They could do the 12 mile in 3 hours or less. They had air assault tabs or badges, which that was a requirement for. They could run the 5 miles in less than 40 minutes. So being there and being able to do that, I think a lot of the tasks were underestimated because in Ranger School, everything is cumulative. So you can do those tasks individually and do well and pass, but in Ranger School, you have to factor in the sleep, the lack of sleep, the extra physical requirements that are in between those tasks that, tire your muscles, and it's just a lot more to it. So I think that before, the lack of information and having those male advocates is very important as well to help push them and ensure that they have the tools that they need to be successful in Ranger School. And I think now that it's a lot better. There's a lot more men who are advocates or even vocal about advocating women earning their Ranger tabs. There's also a Facebook group that's out there for Ranger candidates, for women Ranger candidates. I think her name is Chris Fearer. She's one of the first women to graduate West Point. And she created this Facebook page where female Ranger candidates can get support and information from recent graduates. I mean, from information from training regimen, nutrition, certain gear that they should purchase, all to support their task, their goal to be a Ranger. It's a great Facebook page, great people that are there sharing those lessons learned. And it increased the number of women graduating the course. I think now there's currently 121 who have graduated the course since 2015.
Yeah, I did read that there were over 100 now. So that's really impressive numbers. And hopefully that just keeps climbing. And then, so during a break from that, you got to go to Airborne school. So how was that?
It was good. Airborne school is, I think, air assault school for me was, I mean, if you're afraid of heights, air assault was more frightening than airborne school, but it wasn't too bad. It was just go, a lot of running. Ground week wasn't too bad. I think tower week was the worst because you're always in this harness all day and you're working on your parachute land and fall. So you kind of fall it all over the ground, you're a little sore. And then you have your actual jump week, the final week. So it wasn't too bad at all. I enjoyed being there. And those, I don't know if you've seen in the towers at Fort Benning, because I was senior, I demonstrated going up into the tower where they, you go up in the parachute and then everybody's watching, and then the tower releases you, and then you come down and you do your PLF. So I was able to do that before they actually shut them down. So that's cool. Those towers been there since World War II.
I've seen a lot of videos online. So I skydive like civilian side, so I'm used to the nice kind of soft landings. And I've seen so many videos online of airborne guys having very bad, and girls having very bad landings on like vehicles and buildings and just really bad spots. So did that ever like factor into when you were jumping? Did you get nervous about maybe like landing somewhere where you weren't supposed to?
No, but I knew it was a possibility because it's covered in pre-jump. So as a jump master, I actually landed in trees. So had a tree landing, and I just go over, what the safety requirements that they go over in pre-jump. And, I put my chin on my chest, bring my elbows up high, and, just kind of feet knees together, and you go through the trees. So I didn't lower myself down from the tree because one of the drop zone safety officers were out there. So he came, and he was a buddy of mine, and he kind of got a ladder and just like, come on, get down. And I wasn't that high up, but I was just kind of caught in between like a branch that was in a Y shape. So one leg was stuck in a Y shape, and then the other leg was kind of hanging. So that was one of my worst landings. And I had a few malfunctions, but nothing too bad.
Yeah, like those big canopies, you can't really steer those at all, can you?
No, you can't. Yeah, so you kind of go where the wind goes. That's basically how I landed in the tree. I was the last jumper to exit, and I had like a couple seconds of green light left. And when I exited, the wind took me over the trees that were there, and that's how I ended up landing in the tree. So as much as you try to pull a slip and go the opposite direction, you can't fight that.
So moving on, I read that you have your MBA. So is that something that you did while you were still in the military? And if so, like how did you balance schoolwork with your job, having a family, like all of that?
Yeah, it was tough. Getting an MBA was my goal. That was something that I wanted to do since I joined the military. And I started it in 2018. So I went to South Korea for a second time, and I was working one level up as an operations sergeant major for an MP battalion. And I started my MBA at that time because I wanted to stick to this timeline I had for myself. And, working there 13 plus hour days, coming home, eat, shower, doing 2 to 3 hours of homework, that puts you in bed 12, 1 in the morning, only to get up 4 hours later and do it all over again. When I came back to the States, I was a first sergeant, and that job was even more demanding. So it was definitely tough. I was running on fumes. And I think what I did was, one, I tried to stick to a timeline, And I managed my personal assignments. I managed my calendar as much as I could. I communicated with my battle buddies on this, these are my goals, this is what I'm doing. And I was fortunate that they were very supportive. Because I did my job. When I was at work, I was at work. But if I had a break at lunch, like, hey, I'm not going to lunch with you guys. I'm kind of going to stay here and going to study or going to do an assignment. And I think the key to my success was time management and capitalizing on opportunities that allowed me to stay on track and get ahead. So wisely managing your time and the opportunities that came, they provided that buffer that I needed in order to deal with unexpected situations being a soldier.
And did you have a specific goal in mind for wanting to use your MBA for something in particular, or was that just kind of the goal was to get the MBA?
The goal was to get the MBA. I had a undergrad, a bachelor's in business. So MBA was a degree that I think gave me a lot of wiggle room to do different things. So I love managing, I love people and, operations, those type of things and marketing and all of that. So that gave me a little bit of all those aspects. So I also have it in international business. So learning about currencies, dealing with other countries, having that experience as a soldier, learning culture sensitivities, that's also taught in the international portion for international business degree. So I think it all tied well together. I just didn't know exactly how I was going to use it.
And what are your goals now for the future?
So my short-term goal is to grow my management consulting business. My husband is still serving. He's a senior leader. So while I support him in his military career, I'm going to grow this management consulting business, mainly focusing on team building and personnel engagement techniques and regulatory compliances, things that I'm familiar with. And then my long-term goal is to become a civic leader at the local level. The experiences I have in the military, the perspectives I have, I believe that they're useful. And I want to continue to serve on that broader scale by empowering not only just service members and other women and veterans, but also members of my community.
You got out of the military pretty recently, didn't you?
I did. I retired in December.
How did you find that transition of going from being a military member for so long to now being a civilian and sort of having a little bit more freedom to do your own thing?
I think it has its pros and cons. The camaraderie that you have as a soldier, you don't have that as a civilian. I've done an internship working in a political office, and everybody's doing their own thing. So it's hard to find that unity, that camaraderie that you had as a soldier. I think that's, from soldier, law enforcement, those type of jobs, that's where you can get that experience and you feel that closeness with the people that you work with. So that's the part that I miss. But having my freedom to do what I believe is important, to follow my own path and my own aspirations, that's the whole purpose of leaving the military, was to do that.
And my final question that I always ask everyone, what advice would you give to women looking to join the military?
Yeah, Kate, I saw you ask that question too. And I think everybody has basically been saying the same thing. But I think for me, my advice would be, just like I tell my daughter, is know what your interests are. Do some research on the job, the branch that's out there, that's available to you so you can get the most out of your enlistment or your term in your contract. I think a lot of people in general come in the military for various reasons, but they end up in jobs or doing a task that are not really aligned with who they are as a person. So I would say, know what you want to do. And if you don't know exactly what you want to do, what interests do you have? For example, if you want to travel, get a job or something that will allow you to travel, whether it's, Pacific or Europe or, things of that nature. If you're into engineering, looking at the engineering field, things like that, that's going to help you in your aspirations, not just only as a soldier, but also in your future endeavors.
I said last question, but then that kind of your answer made me think of another one. So with your daughter, has she shown any interest in ever joining the military? And how would you feel if she did?
So she recently talked to me about the reserve. She's doing some training right now in she's interested in Homeland Security. And a young lady that she met, this is another reason why I think the power of networking. She met a young lady who is in the reserves, and they're at FLETC together, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And they're both same age. And so she's telling her about the reserves and, the different benefits that she has. So she kind of brought it up to me, and I'm all for it. I think, one, if you want to go Homeland Security, what are you looking at to, as a reservist, what type of field are you looking at doing? Do you think Homeland Security is going to be the path that you go on? Or are you going to look for something else? So I think that if she wants to join, I would 100% support her. I think everyone should serve. That's just my opinion. I think everyone should serve at some point. But so if she wants to do that, I 100% support her. So hopefully it's something that she chooses to do.
I think the reserves is such a great option as well, because it gives you an idea of, if you like this, then you can potentially go on to do full-time work, or if you don't, then you're not really locked into a long-term commitment with it. And then it also, depending on your job, I know in Canada, I'm a reservist, but I work full-time. But there's a lot of reservists who are also, police officers, firefighters, all sorts of different occupations. And the jobs in the reserves give them skills that are really useful to take back to their civilian jobs as well.
Absolutely. I think that if I knew about the reserves, I probably would have joined it 10 years ago before I retired, or before I even did sign an indefinite contract. I think it's the best of both worlds. You can take an active duty assignment, take a deployment, volunteer for those things if that's something that you're feeling that you want to do at the time, or you just do your 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year training and keep doing what you're doing at the job that you're working. So it's the best of both worlds, definitely.
Awesome. Okay, well, I wish you and your daughter best of luck in the future. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited that we were able to make this happen.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. The biggest way to help support this podcast is to leave a rating and review on your Apple Podcasts and Spotify apps. You can also visit my Instagram page at Shoot Like a Girl Podcast to see photos from the guests, keep up to date with the podcast, and find out about any merchandise releases.